This is the introduction to the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel from the Message translation of the Bible. 4 lives dominate the 2-volume narrative, 1st and 2nd Samuel: Hannah, Samuel, Saul, and David. Chronologically, the stories are clustered around the year 1000 BC, the millennial midpoint between the call of Abraham, the father of Israel, nearly 1,000 years earlier, about 1800 BC, and the birth of Jesus, the Christ, 1,000 years later. These 4 lives become seminal for us at the moment we realize that our ego-bound experience is too small a context in which to understand and experience what it means to believe in God and follow his ways. For these are large lives, large because they live in the largeness of God. Not one of them can be accounted for in terms of cultural conditions or psychological dynamics. God is the country in which they live. Most of us need to be reminded that these stories are not exemplary in the sense that we stand back and admire them like statues in a gallery, knowing all the while that we will never be able to live either that gloriously or tragically ourselves. Rather, they are immersions into the actual business of life itself. This is what it means to be human. Reading and praying our way through these pages, we get it. Gradually, but most emphatically, we recognize that what it means to be a woman, a man, mostly has to do with God. These 4 stories do not show us how we should live, but how in fact we do live. Authenticating the reality of our daily experience as the stuff God uses as the stuff that God uses to work out his purpose of salvation in us and in the world. The stories do not do this by talking about God, for there is surprisingly little explicit God talk here. Whole pages sometimes without the name of God appearing. But as the narrative develops, we realize that God is the commanding and accompanying presence that provides both plot and texture to every sentence. This cluster of interlocking stories trains us in perceptions of ourselves, our sheer and irreducible humanity that cannot be reduced to personal feelings or ideas or circumstances. If we want a life other than mere biology, we must deal with God. There is no alternative way. One of many welcome consequences in learning to read our lives in the lives of Hannah, Samuel, Saul, and David is a sense of affirmation and freedom. We don't have to fit into the prefabricated moral or mental or religious boxes before we are admitted into the company of God. We are taken seriously just as we are and given a place in his story. For it is, after all, his story. None of us is the leading character in the story of our life. For the biblical way is not so much to present us with a moral code and tell us, live up to this, nor is it to set out a system of doctrine and say, think like this and you will live well. The biblical way is to tell a story and invite us, live into this. This is what it looks like to be human. This is what is involved in entering and maturing as human beings. We do violence to the biblical revelation when we use it for what we can get out of it, or what we think will provide colour and spice to our otherwise bland lives. That results in a kind of boutique spirituality. God as decoration, God as enhancement. The Samuel narrative will not allow that. In the reading, as we submit our lives to what we read, we find that we are not being led to see God in our stories, but to see our stories in God. God is the larger context and plot in which our stories find themselves. Such reading will necessarily be prayerful reading, a God listening, God answering reading. The story, after all, is framed by prayer. Hannah's prayer at the beginning, 1 Samuel chapter 2, and David's prayer near the end in 2 Samuel 22 to 23.